Hello and welcome to the second episode of Tech in Chicago. I'm Colin Keeley and I interview Chicago's top founders and investors on this show. Today we have Rod, the founder of OpenAirplane on. OpenAirplane is a plane sharing marketplace for pilots. We talk about the benefits of private aviation over commercial travel, how private aviation works, why your customers are all that matters, and many other things. I think pilots are inherently always very interesting people and Rod is no exception. Enjoy. So Rod, it's great to have you today. Thanks so much for coming on. For people that maybe don't know, what is OpenAirplane?
OpenAirplane makes renting an airplane as easy as renting a car.
Okay. Could you get a little bit more into that? How's it work?
Sure. What we've done is we created a service for pilots that gives them access to aircraft all across the country. We started in June of 2013 with 6 airports and a couple of dozen airplanes all around the country. And we created a universal pilot checkout. The problem we were solving was that if you want to rent an airplane, even if you have a pilot's license, it's pretty difficult. In fact, imagine if you were going to rent a car and you had to take the kid from behind the counter around the parking lot 3 times, sort of do a driver's test before they give you the keys. So even though a pilot's license takes about a year and maybe $10,000 to get, you couldn't use that pilot's license when you traveled, and that was a big problem. So we solved that.
And how did that come about? What's the origin story for it?
For us, it was about scratching our own itch. No one working on OpenAirplane really started by saying, I want to start a company. We just were pilots who felt like there could be more value in aviation and for this community. There are about 600,000 pilots in the United States. And it's kind of a magic power. And so we knew that if we could make having a pilot certificate in your pocket more valuable, we could have a pretty big impact.
And you said, so it's you and another guy or co-founders?
Yeah, so a typical startup needs a hacker and a hustler. So my co-founder, Adam, is the CTO, and I'm someone who comes from a design and user experience background. So always been flying since I was a teenager and always rented airplanes. But again, renting an airplane was something that was just stuck in the 70s. It was archaic. And so we created a system where a pilot could do what we call a universal pilot checkout at one location, and then that would reset the clock on their FAA required training. It would give them a discount on their pilot renter's insurance, and it would even give them access to the same make model aircraft all across the country.
So I know from experience, it could be really hard to recruit a technical co-founder. So how did you guys meet? How do you go about that?
So we've always been a very social company. And so the great thing about social media is that it gives you an opportunity to sort of connect with all the same people who are passionate about the same things. And so there was a large community of us who would be on Twitter and Facebook and listen to the same podcasts and also go to the same air shows. And a large component of these folks who are active in social media go to the Oshkosh Air Show up in Wisconsin every summer. If you're into motorcycles, you probably go to Sturgis, and if you're into airplanes, you go to Oshkosh. And so we met up there, and once the idea started getting some traction, we just decided to work together.
How did you get your first users? How did you sign up your first pilots and their planes? And
a lot of this was about permission. So before we started talking about what became OpenAirplane, we had like a code word, and we didn't really talk about it. We were kind of in stealth a little bit because what we're doing is completely legal. Everything we do today and everything we're doing next is all within sort of the federal, state, and local regulations. But the reason it was hard to rent airplanes was because the insurance industry just has a lot of legacy, a lot of friction. And so when we started talking to our friends who were pilots about this idea of, maybe I could make it easier to rent airplanes, they all loved the idea, but they said, the insurance carriers would never let you do it. So spent almost a year working to create a system that the insurance carriers could back, and only then went out to the community after we first got in sort of permission and buy-in from the industry to go after the customer base.
How did you go about that, dealing with the regulatory issues?
Well, first of all, we designed a business that was legal. There are plenty of sort of sharing economy companies that maybe create gray markets with the idea to sort of bring them into the light later once they get to scale. For instance, there's never been a federal law against letting a complete stranger sleep in your spare bedroom, or giving someone a ride and then having them pay you for it. But there are lots of municipal laws and state laws, and that you can run afoul. But in aviation, everything's a federal law, so it's either legal or it's absolutely not. And so we were very careful to design our business model so that everything OpenAirplane did was legal, and that's the only way to get to real scale when you're in such a regulated environment. You can't jam a business plan through a loophole. So let me let you in on the secret. There are only about 300 airports in the United States you can buy an airline ticket to, but there are over 5,500 public use airports that you have access to if you're a pilot.
So how does it work? Do you have to pay to land or to park?
Well, sometimes, big, hub airports like O'Hare have, landing fees that are hundreds of dollars just to land your plane there. But other airports, they basically waive the fees if you buy a little bit of fuel. I think the last time I landed a civilian airplane at Midway Airport, which is, remember, only 8 miles as the crow flies from downtown Chicago. It cost me like $21. It was cheaper to park the plane than it was to rent a car and park the card when you're downtown. And then you've got other airports where it's essentially free. These destinations where you can spend all day flying to a hub airport and then driving, half the day to get there. That can be a terrible experience. The country has gotten bigger for the first time in human history. It's 20% more time to get from New York to, say, Dallas, Texas, by commercial airline today than it was in 1980. Just because of the congestion. So if you can kind of skip this hub and spoke system that the commercial airlines have, and you have access to private aviation, it's a magic power.
So with OpenAirplane, can you use it as a transportation? Can you go across the country, or is it just for flying around the airport and dropping back off?
So the airplanes that are available in our network are typically piston propeller driven airplanes, right? So they're not very fast. Chicago to Los Angeles is probably better handled by getting a seat on United. They're really good at that. The airlines are fantastic at hub to hub travel. Where the experience falls down and the logistics get terrible is going spoke to spoke. So, for instance, Chicago to New York can be just a couple of hours in an airplane. You can often beat the door-to-door time of the airlines by flying your own plane. And then the minute you're not just going to JFK, but you're going to somewhere in upstate New York that doesn't have a lot of direct airline service, it's way better to fly privately.
For OpenAirplane, how does it work when you get to the airport? What's the check-in process like?
So OpenAirplane allows a pilot to find the airplane they want to rent, look at the local procedure briefing, all that tribal knowledge about what's, makes it easy to fly at a particular airport they've never been to, stuff that isn't even on the chart or in the airport facility directory. They make the reservation through our system, and so they're expecting you. A pilot shows up, you've got your family in tow. They ask you if you have any questions. They hand you the keys to the airplane. They walk you out to the airplane. You go fly. When you're back, you enter the Hobbs and tack time into our app. That then allows us to take care of the billing. You never have to stand there in the lobby fighting with a credit card machine when you're done. You just hand in the keys, fist bump the person at the flight school, and walk out the door.
What's it cost to buy your own plane versus just to use it a couple hours on OpenAirplane?
Well, it's pretty broad. So one of the things that inspired us, much like the rest of the sharing economy, is that access to the good is becoming more important than ownership of the good. So you look at a 2016 Cirrus SR22, they list for about $900,000. It's an amazing piece of equipment. But on the other hand, you can buy a perfectly serviceable light aircraft for about the cost of a decent decent car. $30,000 and you can own an airplane.
And what's it cost to rent on OpenAirplane?
So it's a price that's set by all the operators. It can be under $100 for a 2-seat trainer. It could be a few $100s an hour for something that's got more performance and can go faster. Something like a Cessna 172, which is kind of the most popular general aviation aircraft in our network, runs on average around $150 an hour. And that's only for the time the engine's turning. We call it power by the hour. So it's not like you're, shoving that hamburger down your throat really fast because you're burning hours while you're, flying somewhere for a burger or, getting a round of golf in with friends.
Is there any cost to signing up as a pilot?
The business model's simple enough for even us pilots to understand. It's free to join OpenAirplane as a pilot, and it's free for operators to list their aircraft and participate in our stand eval program. We only make money when we allow pilots to do something they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. We take 10% of whatever the bill is to the pilot as a revenue share.
I know you guys have some pretty amazing traction numbers. How many pilots do you have? How many planes do you have?
Sure. So since we started in June of 2013, we've now grown to 94 locations across the U.S., from Florida to Hawaii, where you can rent an airplane using OpenAirplane. Over 300 aircraft are in that network, everything from tail draggers to light twin-engine airplanes. And then we've just crossed over 10,000 pilots signed up to fly with us.
Wow. And how are you finding those? How are you recruiting 10,000 pilots?
Aviation is like a blood-borne pathogen. Once you get the bug, it's hard to sort of step away from the lifestyle of aviation. And so pilots are very passionate about it, and they talk about it with each other. There are about 600,000 active pilots in the U.S., but they all kind of read the same magazines, look at the same websites, listen to the same podcasts. So it's not terribly hard to get good traction with an audience that's so focused in sort of how they consume media. We started with social media first, being active, posting on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got lots of great photos on our Instagram feed. It's kind of epic because we're pilots. And then that grew into getting some traction with endemic media, like, Flying Magazine and Pilot Magazine, these places where media, covers what's going on in the industry. And we've been really lucky to be able to get the word out that way.
So it's all been pretty much organic, or have you had to pay for any advertising?
So we've never really paid for advertising. A lot of that has to do with the fact that since we started the company until recently, we've bootstrapped. We've never had the money to be able to pay for advertising. So it's all been very much our community of pilots who fly with us really helping spread the word.
So let's get into that a little bit. Have you guys raised any money? Are you looking to raise money in the future?
So we just closed a seed round. We raised $500,000 from a few investors, a couple here in Chicago and a couple overseas. And so that gives us the ability to really start accelerating the business and getting the word out to places that we haven't been able to get the word out, and be able to do a little bit of marketing and more engagement with that community. And then also iterating on the product and really investing in creating a better experience for everybody. So we're hiring software developers.
So how many employees do you have right now?
So technically 2, actually 3 as of last week. Sorry about that, Scott. So we've got a CTO, we've got the 2 co-founders and a director of business development who's now based out of New York.
And so you guys are kind of spread all over the country. Are you looking at focusing here in Chicago and hiring here?
So we're looking to build the engineering team here in Chicago in the short term as we sort of tackle the backlog of cool features that people have been asking for a long time. So we're kind of in the sprint for the next few months here at the tail end of the winter and into the spring, running like knife hands with like Jason Bourne. But ultimately, we're designing a business that we can run from anywhere, and so it's okay to be virtual. I think we've been very much influenced by companies that are based here in Chicago, like 37 Signals, who have a home base but also have the ability to go find great talent anywhere they happen to be.
Do you have any maybe secrets to being productive across the country and all interacting together? Any software you guys use for that?
This isn't going to be a big surprise to everyone, but we've really just started the process of adopting Slack. But over the last few years, one of the things that my co-founder Adam and I did was we set aside time to jump on sort of virtual stand-ups using FaceTime. Whether that was just the video chat versus just phone calls or conference calls, really added a dynamic, the fact that we weren't necessarily in the same city, but we felt like it hadn't been a long time since we last seen each other. So it was almost, the relationship with a co-founder is one that's really important, and you spend a lot of time, interacting. And so the fact that we've got things like video chat, makes that a lot easier.
So what's the best advice you've received as a first-time founder pursuing this new venture?
Well, we've been very lucky because we've been involved in the community here in Chicago. When we first started the company, I was working, nights and weekends on the project while I still had a day job, and then started working at 1871. And so that was fantastic in a way to sort of learn the ropes when it came to being an entrepreneur. And then last year we became a Bunker Labs company. And so being in that environment where you've got a lot of folks that you can ask questions and learn from. I mean, when I first started, I didn't know what a cap table was. I mean, there was just the business part of it wasn't something that I had a lot of experience with. I didn't even set out to start a company. It just kind of ended up being the best way to move forward. Some of the best advice was really about how to communicate ideas and be very clear. There's a lot of hokum about elevator pitches and pitch decks and a lot of static around sort of the process. Be passionate about the idea. Be interested in the problem that you're solving, and all the other sort of tactics, kind of will fall into place for you if you keep pushing. I think the one thing that I found is that folks who become entrepreneurs often have lots of ideas. What you really have to do is focus. Focus on the one that it's okay when it's 11 o'clock at night on a Friday and you're alone, and it's okay that that's what's keeping you up at night. That's probably the thing you should focus on.
So if you could go back to your previous self when you're first starting OpenAirplane and talk to yourself for 15 minutes, what would you say?
Wow. So I think in the early days when it was just a concept and an idea, I probably spent too much time talking to potential investors and, talking to people around the concept before we had traction, before we had customers, before we even had a product, with the idea that, well, this is a really great idea, and then if we could raise money, we can go faster. Well, it really was a tough slog. It's not easy. And unless you have at least some kind of product and some traction with customers, people will take meetings. But there's this old idea that if you ask for money, you'll get lots of advice. And if you want, advice, ask for money. And that really proved to be true. So I think I would have focused more on building more product, moving faster, and just being super laser focused on our customers.
It's great advice. So are there any other founders or companies you look up to?
Jason Fried here in Chicago, 37 Signals, great example of sort of not following the classic venture path. In aviation, I've said multiple times that Tyson and the team over at ForeFlight, they took the iPad and created this amazing tool for pilots where you don't have to buy a paper chart anymore and can use that to have much better situational awareness when you fly airplanes. They really made a huge impact on sort of the user experience of being in aviation. And that was really the inspiration between us and OpenAirplane, is we really wanted to create something that created a really deep impact to this community around the passion for flying.
Do you have a favorite book?
There's a really neat book that stuck with me, actually written by Sarah Hatter here in Chicago, called the Customer Support Handbook: How to Create the Ultimate Customer Experience for Your Brand. And I think especially early on, a lot of startups really start focusing on ads on Facebook and Twitter and just kind of marketing and advertising to drive growth. And I think it's the first 10 customers and then the next 100 and the next 1,000 after that are going to drive way more growth than any advertising platform can ever do. I used to be in the advertising business, and so it was a real big shift for us to not think about how do we promote OpenAirplane, but in fact, really concentrating on the customer experience and delivering on that. That's going to be the best driver of growth. And so really over-indexing for how do you make your customers happy versus how do you yell with a microphone hoping to attract more has been a big lesson for us.
Oh, we'll be sure to put that book in the show notes. And what's your vision for the long term? What's next for OpenAirplane?
We started the company with the idea that we could make aviation more valuable. And the first place we started with was with pilots. The idea that your pilot certificate would stop working unless you sort of spent half a day and hundreds of dollars to turn it back on by having to go somewhere and then do a checkout and then be able to rent the airplane was kind of silly. I mean, it really was archaic. But now we have this ability to go online, find an airplane that's available, book it, pay for it. We've really created a different kind of experience and, very much inspired by the sharing economy. That's our business model, at least, but it's also the experience that we've developed. We're going to continue to expand that. We're able to add multi-engine aircraft, eventually helicopters, eventually seaplanes. There's some really exciting things happening in the aviation industry in terms of like product, like the Icon A5, which is like a flying jet ski. And one day when, those kinds of products are available, more people will come fly. More people will, learn to fly and be able to enjoy aviation. And we want to power all that.
Do you have anything you want to plug for the listeners here? And where can they find you?
Well, if you're Sure. So we created OpenAirplane to be really simple. So it works great on a smartphone or a tablet or a desktop computer. Just go to openairplane.com. If you're a pilot and you're listening, then I can only wonder why haven't you signed up yet? It's free. And then, of course, if you're not a pilot, but you know someone who is, or someone that's interested in eventually learning to fly, we want to be, part of that solution so that, more people can get that magic power.
That was awesome, Rod. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
If you're a pilot, definitely check out OpenAirplane and sign up. It's free. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and review Tech in Chicago on iTunes. Reviews and ratings go a long way to help others find the show. If you guys have any feedback, I'd love to hear from you. It's Tech in Chicago on Twitter. Thank you.